Brothers, good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar titled Fundraising 101. It is just before the 7 o'clock hour on the Eastern time zone. We will begin here in just a few minutes. We're going to give a couple more brothers a chance to join us. Please bear with us and we'll be right back. Brothers, good evening again and welcome to tonight's webinar. For those that just joined us, we're going to give it to about 2 after the hour to start tonight's program. Thank you. Brothers, good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar titled Fundraising 101. This webinar is presented by Phi Gamma Delta in conjunction with 1848 Properties, Phi Gamma Delta's National Housing Corporation, intended to be a resource for our brothers and our house corporations as they seek to improve their chapter housing and housing on our undergraduate campuses. My name is Rob Cadill. I serve on the fraternity staff as our Senior Director of Graduate Involvement and Operations. I am pleased to have another colleague of mine, Thomas Lovejoy, with me tonight. Thomas, introduce yourself real quick.
How's it going, guys? I'm Thomas Lovejoy. I'm one of the newer employees at IHQ, Director of Graduate Involvement, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Thomas. Thomas is a new staff member who is working most directly with housing, so he is working alongside with our presenter this evening to help give you some good information regarding fundraising. But tonight's webinar is about fundraising, and it's titled Fundraising 101, Must-Haves Before the First Gift is ever Solicited. We're fortunate this evening to have a brother named Mark Wilkerson of Vermont 1983 with us this evening. I'll introduce Mark in just 1 minute, but before we start with Mark, I want to show you brothers how you can interact with us tonight. You all are muted to keep our webinar sane this evening and to make sure you can all hear Mark just fine, but we do encourage you to ask questions along the way. If you have questions, and we do encourage them, you can ask those through the questions feature on your screen. If it's If you're on a computer or a tablet, that's going to be a tab similar to what you're seeing on the left side of the screen. If you have to be joining from a mobile device, look for the question mark up towards the top center of your screen. And again, we welcome and encourage questions throughout the webinar. We will hold those till the end and do our best to get back to as many of those as we possibly can before the evening's over. But this evening, I want to introduce our presenter. And again, his name is Mark Wilkinson. Mark is a principal and partner with Columns Fundraising, a fundraising group which has worked with many of our Five-Minute House corporations and many others in the Greek world on a lot of successful campaigns and a lot of chapter house building projects. Mark is a 1983 graduate of the University of Martin, has more than 32 years of consulting and fundraising experience, including serving as Vice President of Development for Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, Chief Development Officer at Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta, Chief Development Officer for the International Life Sciences Institute, and as the previous Executive Vice President of Phi Gamma Delta Educational Foundation. His additional work with Phi Gamma Delta includes serving as a field secretary for the fraternity and as our Director of Graduate Services. His consulting career has spanned 13 years and includes work with healthcare, higher education, secondary schools, and human service organizations. Mark is based in Atlanta and has been a great friend to Phi Gamma Delta. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark and ask him to kick us off tonight.
Great. Thank you, Rob, and thank you, brothers, for joining our call. What we'd like to do tonight is talk about fundraising and why it's necessary for chapter houses, and maybe some of the do's and don'ts, and hopefully leave everyone with some tips on how to move forward. It seems like in the Greek world, there are some pretty significant trends occurring around us. One of which is the amount, number of Greek houses that are being torn down and rebuilt into 10,000 square foot homes, 16,000, 20,000. There are several we know of that are more than 40,000 square feet. They tend to be sorority houses, but nevertheless are being built on college campuses. So that is a huge trend. Increased Greek membership, and I know Rob Cadill and headquarters staff, Bill Martin, and everyone can speak to the Greek membership trends in this country, in spite of what you may hear in the media about the tragic deaths, which indeed are very sad to hear about. There's also some good news with our fraternities and sororities and the Greek system in general, and fraternities are growing. Another trend, think about this for those of you that have children in college now, there are higher expectations by students and their parents for top quality housing. But at the same time, fraternity houses, and I'm speaking about some of our own in Phi Gamma Delta, are older and probably have some health and safety issues that raise some eyebrows when parents tour through there. Some of our chapter houses haven't been renovated in years. In fact, when I was a field secretary in 1983 through 85, so starting 35 years ago, I toured some chapter houses of ours and stayed there with the chapter members. The houses needed renovations then, 35 years ago. Some of those chapter houses I've been back in within the last few years, and nothing has been done in the last 35 years. So, brothers, it's time, and it's happening in other fraternity and sorority houses and on campuses across the country. So let's look at some of the types of facilities that fraternities and sororities are now typically building on college campuses. This happens to be the Theta Chi chapter house at University of Wisconsin. Beautiful campus, beautiful old historic chapter houses, many of which have been renovated. This is our own Mu Upsilon chapter house of Phi Gamma Delta at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Some of you may know that they were in a very old historic home that was built in the 1830s, and it tragically burned about 3.5 years ago. No one was hurt. No one was killed. It was when most everyone was out of the chapter house. But the Graduate Brothers rallied, set up a fundraising committee, and we worked with them to help them build this new $4 million chapter house. Absolutely beautiful for those of you that have a chance to go through Oxford, Ohio, and visit Miami of Ohio. It's a great chapter house to tour through. Our Sigma chapter of Phi Gamma Delta, this is Wittenberg University. They had an old home that was built in 1905. And as you can imagine, a home that was more than 100 years old. There were some health and safety issues when you use it as a fraternity house with multiple people coming in and out all day. So that chapter raised money. We ended up buying the Chi Omega house, which conveniently was right next door to the Fiji house. And that was done through a capital campaign. The original house, built in 1905, was demolished. There were all types of environmental concerns in the chapter house, including asbestos and lead and other things you would expect from a home of more than 100 years old. This is our Theta Chi chapter at the University of Alabama, and one of my business partners is a University of Alabama grad in Theta Chi, and he helped with this fundraising program. I will say there are many, many impressive fraternity and sorority chapter houses on campuses across this country, but probably the University of Alabama has some of the largest, most beautiful, most well-kept chapter houses of any campus in America. So contrary to popular belief, they do more than play football in Tuscaloosa. They build beautiful chapter houses, and they're very proud of their Greek system. Interior living space. There is a niche market of furniture companies and designers that cater specifically to fraternity and sorority chapters, and this is the typical look. What they're wanting is furniture that can hold up to a chapter of live-in 50, 60 guys coming through every day. So they want it to hold up, but they also want it to have a little bit of a non-institutional look so that it does look homey and looks comfortable, especially for visitors and parents when they come to town. These are just more pictures of typical living space, historic displays. These new houses obviously have enough wall space where they can really detail the history of the chapter, and it's very beneficial during the rush process when you have these historic displays that talk about Phi Gamma Delta on an international level, and then Phi Gamma historical facts on the local level related to the university and that campus. So let's talk about today's students. Sometimes maligned as millennials, but I have two of my own, a 23-year-old and a 24-year-old. I will tell you that today's students have higher expectations than many of us did when we were in college. When I started at the University of Vermont in 1979, I was in a dorm room. I had a roommate. It was a cinder block dorm room, cinder block dorm actually, 12 feet wide, 15 feet long. There were two of us. There were 40 of us on the floor, and there was one communal bathroom and several showers. So fast forward to today, where university housing, apartment complexes, and dormitories that are specifically university owned are much more upscale. They have Wi-Fi, fitness centers, pools, all kinds of recreational opportunities, study centers. I think back when my son, who is only a few years removed from Texas Tech University, his third year in Lubbock, Texas. He was in a townhome that was 2 stories, 3 bedrooms. They had a full kitchen with granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, all kinds of recreational opportunities surrounding the complex, and still within an easy walk of campus. So this, brothers, is what we're competing against, today's modern apartment complexes or modern dorms that the universities are building. And the reason they're building them is because they have realized that's housing revenue. And it used to be that the apartment complexes in Greek housing were pretty much cornering the market on getting students to live off campus because of the amenities that were offered. Well, the universities have beat us at our own game and are now offering them on their own campus. And this is important. Today, many students with financial challenges can usually find better housing, safer housing, cleaner housing, healthier housing than a lot of fraternity houses provide. It's very competitive pricing today. So these are the expectations we're dealing with today's students. Again, much different than when many of us were in school. Not saying right or wrong, but it is what it is. And these are the expectations that we have to deal with. Here's another biggie, on-campus food service. It used to be that our chapters, all Greek chapters, had cooks and staff in the house and meals were served. Food was outstanding because when you compared it to the food on campus, there was no comparison. Fraternity food was typically much healthier, better quality, and more importantly, a time for the brothers to get together every day and talk about their day and other things going on campus, and basically an opportunity to build camaraderie. Well, now the universities are in that business, and they offer some pretty healthy food choices. If you haven't been on a college campus lately, and specifically to test out some of the food, there are some pretty incredible options. Healthy food. Students have a card that they just swipe wherever they go, multiple buildings on campus. So food is not far away, and it's high quality food, and it's convenient. So we are competing with that also. They also like single rooms. Some of us may have been, when we stayed in our chapter houses, we may have been in 3 or 4 man rooms, or at least doubles. Most students today like single rooms. They like private bath. They like a study room where they can have privacy as opposed to going to the library. They also have become more vocal about noise in our chapter houses, and that's part of the reason that university housing and apartment complexes have been so favorable to them is from the noise factor. They can get the quiet they need. They can get the privacy that they want. And then finally, we hear this over and over again when we work with fraternity chapters in their fundraising campaigns. We interview a lot of the brothers, undergraduates and graduates, to determine what it is they want in their new or renovated chapter house. And one of the biggest things we always hear, as here in the slide, the food in the house sucks. So food matters. And for those of you that are considering renovations and or a whole new build, food needs to be an important component of everything in the project. It needs to be taken into consideration. So before you dive headfirst into a fundraising campaign, let's answer a few questions. What is your competition doing on campus? Very important question, because I'll tell you, in the Greek world, when your next door neighbor is building a $10 million chapter house, it goes a long way in getting your graduate brothers to say, hey, We can do better than that. They're spending 10. We need to build a $12 million chapter house. The sororities are doing a great job at that. I mentioned Alabama. We're working with a sorority chapter at University of Florida right now, and they are tearing down their existing chapter house, which is about 65 years old. It's outlived its useful life. Massive air conditioning problems, and if you've ever been to Gainesville, Florida, aka the swamp, you'll understand why air conditioning is so important. But they're building a $10 million new structure, tearing down what they have and then building right on top of that. And they're doing that because the other sororities on the row have either already done that or are in the process of doing that. So as strong as this sorority is at Florida, they are risking being left behind in the rush or recruitment process because their home won't be the newest or the biggest. Do you have convincing case for support? Very, very important. Are you building just for the sake of building, or are you building because there are issues? The sorority at University of Florida, for the past month, they have had HVAC people out at their chapter house trying to at least get some air to function in the sleeping rooms of the chapter house. There were afternoons where the temperature in the upstairs bedrooms was in the 90s. They could not regulate the air conditioning, and that was part of their case for support. They just decided we can't keep throwing good money after bad. We have got to do something with this. The house is old. It's Florida. It's humid. It's hot. We need to build to today's standards. Another question asked before you jump in. Do you have the graduate volunteers that are available and ready to help and make the bold statement saying, we need a new chapter house and I'm making my commitment today? Are you willing to spend the money to raise the money that you need? Very important question, because there are a lot of associated costs with building a new chapter house. Architectural fees, permitting, legal fees, all kinds of design fees. Don't forget the furniture and fixtures. You can build the most beautiful structure in the world, but unless you have allocated funds for furniture, fixtures, and other nice things inside the house, you need to be aware that it's going to cost money to raise money. And that includes if you end up hiring a fundraising firm to help you do that. Some chapters do, some chapters don't. I will tell you, fundraising is a full-time job. So for those of you that don't have full-time jobs and are willing to volunteer to do it, that is great. That would be the ultimate gift to your chapter and to Phi Gamma Delta. But for those of you that have jobs, families, and other commitments, fundraising is a full-time job. So sometimes you have to pay for outside resources to do that. Other costs include graphic designers as you're preparing materials, you're printing materials that you'll send to your graduate brothers. You may want to do a quick video that is online on your website. That'll be a cost. All these things need to be considered. Also, do you have backroom gift and pledge processing? Doesn't matter if you have the most generous graduate brothers in the world and they're willing to give. If you can't process their pledges when they make them, if they're a one-time pledge or multi-year pledge, then you're risking losing support from graduate brothers, because they want to know when they make a gift that it's acknowledged, it's processed, and spent in the way it is. There are companies out there that do that, that are specific collectors of funds. Typically, most chapters on college campuses use one of several firms that are out there that collect regular monthly dues or regular room and board charges from the undergraduates. And more than likely, your chapter's already using one of those firms, and those are the ones that can help in the pledge processing and collection function. And sorry, brothers, I just itchy trigger finger here. Do you like roller coasters? What do we mean by that? Well, raising money through a capital campaign, as I said, is a lot of work, and there are good days and there are bad days. And sometimes you talk with prospects that may have been very successful in their lives, in their careers, and are people that you maybe make an assumption that, sure, they ought to be able to make $1 million gift or $500,000 or $100,000 gift. It's very important to remember that there is capacity to give and there is propensity to give. Capacity means they have the revenue or they have the resources to give. Doesn't mean they'll give it. Propensity means that they will give it. So for those prospective brothers that have the capacity and you're expecting them to give it a large amount, many times they don't. Those brothers that you're not expecting anything from, sometimes they're the ones that step forward and make it happen. So that's what we mean by the roller coaster. It's up and down day to day, and that's just your typical capital campaign experience. So what comes first if you decide to do a fundraising campaign? Well, we need a graduate team in place that has a clear target for what needs to be done. I mentioned the Wittenberg, our Sigma chapter house earlier. They had health and safety issues in a house that was more than 100 years old. So their clear target, we need to provide safe, healthy, living quarters for our undergraduate brothers. That was their clear target. They did some work to determine what would it cost to do that. That's what you need to do. Graduate brothers that are willing to volunteer their time to put the right experts in place to identify what the cost of that clear target is. Expectations for undergraduate behavior. This goes without saying. However, undergraduates need to be educated in the process if you are indeed moving into a capital campaign. They need to be able to speak clearly and concisely when a graduate brother shows up unannounced and wants a tour of the chapter house. Undergraduates need to be polite, introduce themselves, introduce the graduate to other undergraduates that are in the chapter house, and they need to be on their best behavior. And this is so important. This is so important when you're asking graduates for money, because if the undergraduates are misbehaving and may have had some alcohol-related incidents, and I'm not even saying in the chapter house, but maybe around town or on campus, and it happens. I mean, we're dealing with 18 to 21-year-olds generally. It happens. We need to work really hard to get the undergraduates to understand that their behavior directly impacts graduate gifts to this effort. Okay? We recommend you submit a request for proposal if you're going out and hiring outside counsel. And what do we mean by a request for proposal? Well, generally, it explains what you're trying to do. You send this to several firms, and you ask about the processes that firm would use, the timeline that they would expect to follow for the services that you need. You want to ask them what their previous experience is in fundraising, particularly for fraternity chapters, sorority chapters, because there is a nuanced difference in fundraising when it comes to raising money for a Greek organization versus a hospital versus higher education versus a community service type organization. You'll want to know when you hire a firm in your proposal, you'll want to ask, who will be doing the work? Is it the person that's there selling their services to you? Or is it someone that you didn't meet that's in the back office? You'll want to know who you're working with, because you'll be living pretty closely with these professional fundraisers over the next number of months to make sure your project succeeds. And you'll also want references. Those are basic questions. Many of you in the business world have probably sent out RFPs. Same concept. You just want to understand who would you potentially work with, what will they do, and how experienced and successful have they been. We also recommend a feasibility study, which basically surveys your membership in a confidential manner as to what they think of the proposed building campaign. Typically, it would be sitting down with 25 to 30 graduate brothers, sometimes less, sometimes more, but 25 to 30 graduate brothers that have capacity to give, and going in and telling them about the project, getting their ideas. Prospective donor, what do you think about this? Here's potentially what the new chapter house will look like. We've gotten some preliminary architectural renderings. What do you think? Good, bad, ugly. And you know what, Mr. Graduate Brother, I'm not here to ask you for money, but hypothetically, if down the road you were asked to contribute, would you? Yes, no, maybe. And if yes, again, I'm not here to ask for money, but is there a range in which you might consider a contribution payable over the next 3 to 5 years? And the reason we ask that question, brothers, is because we want to be able to identify where the money is and at what level. And it's a pretty telling exercise when we do that, because most people are incredibly willing to give us a number. Most people, when they do give us a number, they're sandbagging, and generally, if properly cultivated down the road, would give a larger amount than they mentioned in the feasibility study. So it's basically asking for advice and counsel. One of the cardinal rules of fundraising is if you go through the front door and you ask for money, you'll come out with advice and counsel. If you go in through the front door and ask for advice and counsel, eventually with proper cultivation, you'll end up with money for your project. It's one of the cardinal rules of fundraising. Other must-haves in capital campaigns: name gift opportunities. We've seen with some of these large chapter houses that are being built, the chapter house itself will be named for a graduate or the graduate's family, or maybe a parent or deceased spouse. Name gift opportunities for every room in the house. Typically the bedrooms in a new chapter house for a $25,000, $50,000 or higher gift can be named. Other must-haves: strong graduate leadership, consistent follow-up with volunteers. We do need a top 25 list that could fund 80% of the goal. And yes, brothers, if you have 1,000 graduate brothers in your chapter, at the end of the day, about 25 of them will fund 80% of your campaign goal. Okay? And we'll talk about that in a little bit when we look at a gift chart. We recommend a double ask or triple ask. What do we mean by that? Well, let's just look at the triple ask. So we want the graduate brother to pay dues every year to the House Corporation or to the Graduate Association or whatever the name of your organization is. And we want that to be an annual thing. So it might be $500 a year that the brother is asked for to do that. The second part of the triple ask would be, well, Joe, over and above your annual contribution of $500, we'd like you to consider a $10,000 capital gift for our building project. That can be paid over 3 to 5 years. And again, that's over and above the annual $500 gift you make. Third part of the triple ask is the legacy gift. The legacy gift. Well, graduate brother, we'd like for you to consider leaving a legacy with our chapter where you got your start and hopefully made lifelong friendships and learned how to work with people and use those skills in your career to be successful. We would like that legacy gift. And just to put it bluntly, there are two truisms in life. We're all going to die, and we all need a will. I can't say it any clearer than that. And just to be totally transparent, I am not an attorney, but I can tell you with 100% assuredness that we are all going to die, and we all need a will. So the triple ask: annual gift, capital gift, and legacy gift. Campaign must-haves: specific dollar amount. And this is one of the most difficult parts of a fundraising campaign, because some of us, and this is human nature, some of us shy away from asking for a specific dollar amount. If I go to see a graduate brother that I went to school with, I'll say, Joe, you know what? I believe in this campaign. I'm making a $10,000 contribution to it. I'd like you to match my gift. I just asked him for a specific dollar amount. I asked him for $10,000. Now, listen to this ask. If I went to see Joe and I'd say, hey, Joe, we're building this new chapter house and I'd like you to consider a gift. Period. No ask. What typically happens when an ask like that is made? Well, Joe most likely will not do a $10,000 gift. He will probably do a much lower gift. In fact, it might even be below $1,000, because you haven't set any expectations out there for him as to what level he should ask. So this is one of the most time-consuming, difficult aspects of a capital campaign. But every person needs to be asked for a specific dollar amount. And every campaign needs a gift chart. So what do we mean by a gift chart? Well, gift charts are fundraising 101, used by all nonprofits, all higher education institutions, any organization that is raising money. And it's uncanny the way they work. They're fascinating. This is for a hypothetical $5 million campaign. Brothers, look at, in the far left column, the number of gifts, then moving to the right, the range of gifts. Third column is total, and then the fourth column is cumulative. So if we start in the first row, on a $5 million campaign, we need one gift at $1 million. Basically, 20% of the campaign goal comes from one gift. So that'd be one brother, one family, one entity, one family foundation, whatever that may be for your particular chapter. It is uncanny how this works. It does not matter if it's $5 million, $50 million, or $500 million that we're trying to raise. That lead gift is generally 20% of what that total campaign value is. So moving down the gift chart in the second row, we need one gift at $500,000. We need 4 gifts at $250,000, 8 gifts at $100,000, and then 15 at $50,000. If you look at the $50,000 line and go all the way to the right, the cumulative total there is slightly more than $4 million. So that would be 80% of your $5 million goal. That comes from less than 30 individuals. Less than 30 individuals, in this case, 15 at 50, 8 at 100, 4 at 250, 1 at 500, and 1 at $1 million. Less than 30 individuals will give you 80% of your campaign goal. And again, doesn't matter if it's 5 million, 50 million, or 500 million. Those numbers, you just need to keep adding zeros as to what the range of gift is. but it is a relative few that will fund the campaign. So I want to say this, and if I offend anyone that's on the phone, I'm sorry, but it's in this case, I'll say the truth hurts. When we want to raise, let's say we want to raise $1 million. I've seen this math happen with house corporations and chapters before. We want to raise $1 million to do a renovation for our chapter house. We have 1,000 graduate brothers, so every brother just needs to kick in $1,000. 1,000 times 1,000's $1 million. Wow. Problem solved. Campaign done. Brothers, it does not work that way. Please don't think that way. And if other graduate brothers during house corporation meetings or fundraising meetings say all we need are 1,000 brothers to kick in 1,000 each, please stop that train of thought from moving any further, because fundraising does not work that way. Okay? We have a case for support, which includes the explanation of the need. It defines the target. Generally, in a case for support, it could be anywhere from a trifold brochure to an 8-page brochure. We've seen them as large as 16 pages. In our opinion, that's a little bit much, but it just depends upon the age and the style of the chapter and what they would like to put out there. A lot of chapters will appeal emotionally by showing a lot of photos and telling a lot of stories of chapter brothers through the years and through the decades. Case for support also asks for their support. It asks them or tells them how they can participate in the campaign. Okay, so if someone asks you, well, what do we need before we launch a campaign? It's not rocket science. We need a clear, concise case for support. That case for support may be that the chapter house is falling apart because it's 80 years old and we haven't done any work on it for years. It may be a health issue where it's an older chapter house and there's still lead, there's asbestos, there are things in that chapter house that should not be there for a healthy environment. It may be HVAC and other systems in the chapter house, like the sorority at University of Florida, where they just can't keep throwing money at it anymore. They have got to start from scratch. You need a very strong house corporation that is operating efficiently. You need a supportive group of undergraduates. And I'll tell you, one of the most exciting things that we see whenever we go into campaign mode with fraternities and sororities, we will work with the undergraduate chapter to get some type of cash pledge from them so that when we start asking graduates for money, we can say, you know what, your undergraduate chapter has already made a gift. 100% of the undergraduates have committed X dollars in quarterly or semester dues that is going to the house corporation for this project. This chapter in Florida that I keep referencing, the sorority, their undergraduate sisters, and keep in mind sororities are larger than fraternities. This particular group has 270 undergraduate sisters. They have been assessing themselves every semester for the last 3 years for this project, and they have assessed themselves $400,000. That is cash sitting in the bank for this building project. And now when we're going out and approaching their alumni, think about the statement that we can make by saying, your undergraduate chapter is 100% in. They've already committed $400,000 of their own money to this project. It raises eyebrows, and their alumni are really excited about that. You need a communication plan, which includes hard copy snail mail, also social media and e-blasts and things that keeps talking about progress being made. And then this is real important. We need early commitments from the board and from key volunteers. Before we ask a graduate brother for money, 100% of the House Corporation board members or the BCA board members, or if you've already established the fundraising committee, those members need to make their commitment to the campaign first. More times than not, we will be asked, well, what has the House Corporation done? How much have they contributed? It's less important to be able to say that they've given collectively $250,000 or $100,000 than it is to be able to say 100% of our graduate leadership of our House Corporation, BCA, fundraising committee, Purple Legionnaire, all of them have made a commitment to this effort. So now, Joe, graduate brother, it's your turn. So you've answered questions, you've got a committed graduate base, and now you're ready to jump in. So bring on the campaign. Well, what are the steps? What are the steps then? Well, we developed the prospect list. I will tell you that the headquarters has updated lists of your graduates, and they do a good job with address changes and getting the most up-to-date information, realizing, of course, that so many people, especially young people, move often, so they are constantly changing addresses, updating phone numbers and such. I will tell you the two most critical pieces of information that we really like to have nowadays is the personal email and the cell phone, because it does not matter what their mailing address is as they move around the country, they will not change their cell phone number. So that's the most critical piece of information we find. When you want to contact them, that's the best thing to use. We want to recruit a steering committee. When you're in a campaign, giving is not optional. We say that over and over, but every single steering committee member or fundraising committee member, House Corporation, BCA, I've already said this several times, so that may be one of the most important takeaways of the evening. Giving is not optional. Everyone must make a gift in order to have this campaign be most successful. We need to train volunteers. What do we mean by that? It's more coaching, really, in that volunteers are going to be the most effective fundraisers for you, where a pledge brother can go to one of his pledge brothers or one of his officers when he was on the cabinet and say, you know what, I really would like for you to join me in this effort. I'm pledging X dollars. I'd like you to match that. We go through fundraising, asking, coaching, and getting people up to speed so that they feel comfortable doing that. We want to cultivate lead gift prospects first and foremost. Remember the gift chart that we looked at a few minutes ago. We need those top gifts, the $1 million, the $500,000, the $250,000 gifts. We need those first. It builds momentum. So when I am out asking for a gift, I like to say, Joe, I'd like you to match my commitment of $10,000, but also you should know in our $5 million fundraising effort, we have already raised $2.5 million, including one brother that's pledged $1 million. So this train has left the station, and we've got brothers that are committed to it. It's a great momentum building tool when you can be able to confirm the cultivation of lead gift prospects and their gifts, and then announce it to others. So other things, ask for a specific amount, and follow up. What do we mean by that? Well, all of us are busy, and you may ask me today to do something, and I may say, yeah, can I get back to you next week? Well, next week comes and goes, and more than likely I'm not trying to avoid getting back to you. I just have other things that hit my desk at work, or I may have family responsibilities or other commitments, and I don't get back to you next week. So it behooves you as a volunteer, as a graduate, on the steering committee or involved with this campaign to keep following up and track me down. Okay, these are some typical objections. This is just informational purposes. These are questions you'll get in a fundraising campaign, which you need to be able to answer. Why do you need my hard-earned money? So therefore, you'll need to be able to articulate the case for support and why we need a new chapter house, why it's important to our local chapter, why it's important to Phi Gamma Delta. Who will manage the contributions? It's very important, very important. Do you have a system in place, the banking relationship where the contributions can go, the online collection process? As I mentioned earlier, there are firms out there that do that backroom collection, account for it, and provide reports of pledge balances, send pledge reminders. They do all that for you. But you need to be able to tell your graduate contributors that you have a process. We get a lot of times the question, is it tax deductible? Well, typically gifts to a fraternity chapter house are not deductible. The house corporation is not what's known as a 501c3 organization where charitable contributions can be accepted. There is an opportunity to partner with the Phi Gamma Delta Educational Foundation in Lexington, Kentucky. Ben Robinson is the executive director, and Ben can explain this program a lot better than I can. But bottom line, brothers, there are opportunities to run some contributions through the Educational Foundation for those donors that want that tax deductibility. Typically, those are the larger donors. That's how we entice them to make larger gifts if you offer them educational, or I should say a charitable deduction through the foundation. Here's the caveat, though. Typically, a new chapter house has about 25% of its square footage that the IRS would deem as educational and charitable in nature. So it would be the amount of money that it costs to build that 25% of the new chapter house that theoretically could be gifted to the Educational Foundation. Then the Educational Foundation makes a grant back to the House Corporation to pay for those charitable and educational areas. Lawyers are involved in that. It is a process. Ben Robinson can speak to that. But typically the IRS has been favorable toward about 25% of new chapter house construction as being educational and charitable. Other objections you might get: well, how do I know my contributions are going to be spent in the right way? Do the undergraduates deserve it? And the one that I love the most, it only takes one idiot. And when we say that, we mean, only one 18 to 22-year-old to ruin it for everyone. I laugh at that because, you know what, I have a belief that all of us at one time or another might have been close to being that idiot. I know certainly when I was 18 years old at the University of Vermont in the Beta Upsilon chapter, I may not have been the smartest guy there. It happens, and we just have to continue working with undergraduates and coaching them, and the international fraternity and headquarters staff and field secretary visits. They do a great job in reinforcing what our standards are and how all of us should act on behalf of Phi Gamma Delta. But you'll probably get a question like that occasionally. Okay. From a house corporation standpoint, here are some other things you'll get. Do you have a balance statement? What's your budget? Do you have reports? You have to be completely transparent with your graduates that you're asking to invest their dollars in this project. Do you have a graduate managed webpage, Facebook, LinkedIn? Very important. We recommend that there be a graduate managed social media platform. The undergraduates typically have it. They do it on their own, but sometimes the stuff that they post doesn't interest graduates. Sometimes the things that graduates post does not interest undergraduates. So always good to have a graduate managed platform. Do you have a newsletter? I can tell you consistently, I remember this when I was a field secretary, one of the things where we used to ding the chapters was, they weren't consistent in their newsletters. They might get one out every 2 years, every 3 years. Realistically, you need several a year to keep that line of communication going. Town hall meetings, those are always helpful, probably on a quarterly basis with your house corporation, or do you do open conference calls? These are questions that you'll get, and your answers can show that you have an efficiently operating house corporation, which of course impacts your fundraising dramatically. We want to coach the undergraduates, welcoming graduates, have the house clean. When graduates are visiting, we want them to talk intelligently about the campaign, and we want them to sell the campaign to their parents. It is not uncommon to get several parents during the campaign process to make a nice contribution to the effort, knowing that their son will hopefully live in that new chapter house 18 months to 2 years down the road. Graduate communication plan, another thing. As you can tell, brothers, there are a lot of things we're going through this evening. There's a lot of work involved with a fundraising campaign, and hence why we're putting this in a document that all of you can reference and that we can talk about, because there are so many steps. Fundraising is more than a full-time job. We need a timeline. We want to use social media to communicate with our graduate brothers, host small group cocktail parties, and we also want to network. We want to find the connectors. In other words, what brother can get us in to see another brother that may be very well guarded by his administrative assistant, or may be involved in sports or entertainment, and is just very difficult to get to. There's always a connector. There's always a pledge brother. There's always a best friend from the time that brother was in the chapter as an undergraduate. So we want to find the connectors. Did I mention that giving is not an option? All graduates on the House Corporation, BCA, fundraising committee or steering committee, whatever it's called, need to make their commitment first before we ask others. We want to visit the key graduates first, i.e. those prospects that are at the top of the gift chart. And then we want to encourage matching gifts. What do we mean by that? Well, typically there's a brother in a pledge class that said, you know what? I would like to challenge all the pledges in my pledge class that all of us combine our gifts and we raise $100,000 for this new chapter house or renovated chapter house. Very effective when someone steps forward and says that. Or another form of a match is to his pledge class, he might say, I am challenging all of you to give $100,000, and if you do that, I will match it with $100,000 of my own. Very effective. Challenge matches work, and they're typically in fraternity and sorority campaigns. We're able to find several brothers that are willing to do that. And then we get to the going public phase. Everything we've talked about up till now has really been what we call the silent phase, where we're going after the larger gifts and we're building momentum. We're getting all the infrastructure built for a campaign, and then we go public. And typically we've got at least 50% of the goal committed before we go public. So we would probably at a Saturday football game, it might be homecoming, we would say, we've already raised $2.5 million or $3 million. We now want you to take part. These are the brothers that haven't been asked yet. Face-to-face solicitation is always the most effective. And remember, 100% of the people that you don't ask won't give. So, brothers, I've covered a lot of material tonight, but do want to take any questions or comments or thoughts, any way that we can be helpful to you and your chapter's efforts to raise funds. There is a great need for committed graduates to continue working on behalf of our undergraduates and providing safe and healthy housing. So I would say to each of you, thank you for listening and thank you for your involvement with Phi Gamma Delta. Time for questions.
Great, Mark, thank you so much. Again, brothers, this evening, if you've got questions, and we've got a handful here already, and we're gonna get to some of those. If you've got questions for Mark or for Thomas or I, please feel free to use the chat feature on your phone to ask those tonight. First, Mark, just want to give you a shout out here from brother Nicholas Walker. Nick is a Western Michigan brother on his corporation there. He says, thank you for drawing the contrast between chapter houses and campuses from the 70s and 80s to what students and brothers' expectations are today. This is something seldom taken into consideration when graduate brothers are in conversations with undergraduates. So I think Nicholas certainly appreciates that. And I think that leads me to a question is, particularly when you're working with graduates who are pretty far removed from the current campus climate, what are some of the other kind of eye-opening things that they tend to see as they start to unravel the campaign and fundraising process?
I think when you're working, and that's a great question, Nicholas. Thank you, and thank you for your comment too. It really is eye-opening when you try to compare or remember when you were a student what your housing accommodations were. As I said, I was in a cinder block dorm room. My son was in a two-story townhome with granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and every modern technological advance known to man. Just a different environment. Typically, graduate brothers tend to get hung up on the way it was. Well, the way it was with when we used to throw our Fiji Islander parties, or when we had a house mom, and how she would be at the evening meal, or things they used to do. One of the hardest but most necessary things, Nicholas, that we have to do is convince the graduate brothers that yes, we understand that, we appreciate that, we'd actually like to talk about that, maybe show some photos if you have them, if you can share them with us, that we can put online in our social media posts, and maybe even in our case for support moving forward. We'd like to be able to say, hey, remember when? But at the same time, we have to subtly say to them, and times change. And maybe I found this successful. Sometimes I'll try to refocus the conversation with an older graduate brother on, tell me about your family, your Fiji son and your Fiji grandson, or tell me about your grandchildren, even if they're not Fijis. Tell me about where they are in school and what they're doing. Are they in a fraternity? Are they in a sorority? Get them talking about the younger generation of their family. And that makes, kind of brings them around to understand what I'm trying to say, that expectations have changed because their grandchildren are not living in college dorms like we did. Other questions?
Sorry, Mark, I was I stepped away there. I got another question from Bill Oliver, who's a longtime House Corporation member and president for our Penn State chapter. Bill says, we don't need a new house, but we need a new slate roof and brick pointing. Not very pretty, but we do need the funding. For those sorts of projects where it's really more than a small fundraising, a pretty modest effort at least, how do you address those type of needs where it's maybe you just don't get the excitement you do from a new house or a big renovation?
Right. It's so it's based on tradition and history. And what I mean by that, Bill, is I had the privilege of working with our Omega Mu chapter at University of Maine last year. They live in a very historic structure. In fact, it's on the National Historic Registry, and they call it the Castle, built in 1925. And they did exactly that. They needed roofing, they needed windows, they needed new pointing and all of that, but they had to do it to historical standards because they're on the registry. So they crafted a case for support that was, to preserve the castle. And my sense would be that you'd want to try the same thing at Penn State. We want to preserve our chapter house, and we need this historical looking structure to be maintained for years to come. There's, in fact, Bill, if you go to the website omegamu.org, that is their online case for support, and it shows pictures of the castle and everything that they're doing and the videos they've posted there. It'd probably be very helpful to you in your efforts to raise money for Penn State. And Bill, sorry about last Saturday against Michigan.
Great, thanks, Mark.
Okay.
Mark, I think a question we get a lot. Maybe you can help address this. And a lot of times the fundraising process, as you explain, is pretty complicated, but it is kind of expensive as well. So why help our brothers really understand why do you really need to hire someone to help with the fundraising, especially when we're talking about a large campaign? What if you've got brothers who are willing to give the time? Why would you still recommend to engage someone like yourself to assist?
Outside fundraising counsel, it's what we do for a living, more than 40 hours a week, more than 8 hours a day. It is more than a full-time job. Universities hire professional fundraising staff. Hospitals hire professional fundraising staff. There are just basic steps that trained fundraisers know to take, and it is, I promise you, the most ethical fundraisers out there, and there are many, are good at what they do. Typically a cost to raise a capital campaign goal. Generally, we see fundraising costs that are anywhere from 8% to 15% to raise $1. So, in other words, if you're trying to raise $1 million, $2 million, you're probably looking at spending about $100,000, maybe anywhere from $80,000 to $150,000 to raise that money. Of course, the larger the campaign, the lower the cost to raise $1 because there's economy of scale. But these are professional people that are out there that do this for a living. And I'll tell you one of the other things that they're really good at doing, because I go on calls, my business partners go on calls with graduates to prospective donors. Sometimes the graduate is too close to the brother that is being asked for money. They might have grown up together, or they might have been pledge brothers and are now best friends. It's very hard to ask your best friend for a large gift sometimes. So a lot of times outside firms can come in and help with that conversation and make the ask. The other thing we do is we annoy the heck out of your volunteers that are working on your fundraising campaign. We try to keep everyone on a timetable, and if someone says they will contact 3 graduate brothers and get back to us within 2 weeks, well, you know what? We want them to do that, and if we don't hear from them in 2 weeks, we call them. We kind of keep people their feet to the fire because your success is our success. We want you to raise the money and be done within the timetable.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
And Mark, this is Thomas Lovejoy speaking.
You mentioned, we saw a question after you mentioned working with the Educational Foundation. Could you just give a quick overview of what working with the Educational Foundation would look like in a fundraising effort?
Sure. So let's use some hypothetical numbers. Let's say there is it's a $10 million chapter house, brand new. Theoretically, if it's designed properly and you work with your architects on this, about 25% of the total square footage of the new chapter house could be classified as educational and charitable in nature. The IRS has typically blessed that. There are attorneys that need to get involved with the foundation to approve it. But theoretically, $2.5 million of the $10 million cost is for educational and charitable purposes: study rooms, libraries, desks, whatever you can get in that chapter house. So that $2.5 million can be raised through the Educational Foundation. Donors make their pledges and gifts to the foundation. And we usually recommend that it be your higher end gifts, that there be a minimum threshold, probably $50,000 and up. Those gifts can go to the foundation. Anything below $50,000 goes to the house corporation. We don't recommend, for a lot of reasons, we don't recommend that you tell brothers that 25% of their gift be sent to the foundation, the other 75% be sent to the house corporation, regardless of size of gift, whether it's $1 million or $100. Creates an accounting nightmare, paperwork nightmare, follow-up nightmare. And to encourage those larger gifts that are on the gift chart, give them that added incentive of making a donation to the foundation. Work with Ben Robinson, call Ben at the headquarters and ask him how to set up a housing fund for your chapter. The usual way that they operate is gifts come in, they're recorded in that restricted account for your chapter, and then you do have to begin the renovation or building project. There has to be progress made, structure coming out of the ground or something before the Educational Foundation can gift that money back to the house corporation. That is a really simple explanation, Thomas. I would recommend that anyone that is interested call Ben Robinson, and he can give more details.
Great, thank you, Mark. Mark, we've about hit the end of our time tonight. Before I wrap us up, any last words or advice you'd like to give our brothers on the webinar this evening?
Well, I would say this is one of the, generically, is one of the best fundraising times we have seen. And I've been in the fundraising business now for 33 years, and people are giving money. Don't pay attention to any of the media types that are saying the new tax bill takes away people's deductibility and they're not going to give. We are seeing incredibly large gifts from incredibly generous people. And our recommendation would be, if you have a strong case for support, if you have graduate brothers that are behind the effort and willing to help, and most importantly, if you have a chapter house that needs renovation or needs to be completely rebuilt, for the sake of our undergraduates, for the sake of our future of Phi Gamma Delta, consider making it happen. There's no time like the present. Brothers, I wish you luck, and please reach out to Ben Robinson or Rob or Thomas, or if I'm happy to follow up also if you have other questions, if you need to get some advice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Mark, we greatly appreciate your time and you sharing your thoughts with us this evening on this very important topic for house corporations. But more so, brothers, I want to thank you on the webinar for what you're doing to support Phi Gamma Delta and for helping to provide safe housing for undergraduate members. Brothers, tonight's webinar will be available when we're wrapped up here. A recording will be sent to you via a follow-up email, and will also be posted shortly on figam.org/1848properties. This is the second in a growing number of webinars and additional resources developed by 1848 Properties, all to support you and your efforts of your house corporations to provide safe and long-lasting housing for Phi Gamma Delta. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and thank you so much for what you're doing. Have a good evening.
Good night.